Where's my chair?
I would like to know that too. But because all the children dressed up in traditional wear, loads of people are taking pictures with them.
Okay.
So he might be doing that.
That's the distraction of the
Yeah, it's a very sweet distraction. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we will begin shortly. Let me make a few announcements. Let me remind you that we aim to make this forum a climate neutral and sustainable event. We invite all participants to support our efforts by calculating your carbon footprint with the help of our volunteers. We also encourage you to offset your personal emissions at the UNFCCC booth on the second floor. Please keep in mind that APFSD is a paper-smart event. No printing services will be provided, and we invite you to use your personal computers and handheld devices to access documents and the program on the APFSD website. Please help us to reduce plastic and water waste throughout the forum. Please refill your water bottles at our water dispensers and avoid the use of straws. You will find sustainable food options in our cafeteria on the first floor and at the local food stores set up in our garden on the ground floor. For participants entitled to daily subsistence allowance, if you have not done so, kindly bring the required documents to the ESCAP Secretariat at the DSA payment counter, which will be set up outside Conference Room 1 from 10 a.m. All delegations are encouraged to submit their statements at their earliest convenience to the conference room officers. A form to request to speak should be completed to ensure that you are recognized by the chair. We encourage you to make your requests early to ensure availability of our interpretation services. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, kindly take your seats. We will begin shortly.
So can you say her name is Tinkia? Little Tinkia she's lost. She's lost. The mom came to me and asked me to. The little Tinkia is lost. The mom is pink outfit for baby girl.
Pink outfit for baby girl.
Tinkia.
I'll say that.
Yeah, please. And red shoes.
Did the UN security?
She's lost. Everybody's looking for her. Come, please.
You don't think this is part of your job? No. Yeah. I think the security.
He doesn't want to stay at this stupid thing.
Yeah,
he wants to walk here and talk with the mic.
Yeah.
Can I? So I have to.
Did you ask Siamir for
Another mic.
I love when she's so stressed. Tinkia. Tinkia.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, kindly take your seats. We will begin shortly. Please ensure that your phones are switched off or on silent.
They're already there, sitting.
Well, yes, because you don't give me a scenario that we invite them. Yes, so, correct?
Should I invite them?
I would like to invite the rapporteur for session 4, the rapporteur of the
It
round
says
table.
I have with me at the rostrum.
Yeah, okay.
So, bring them here.
These are the name of the rapporteur. Okay, I'll do it.
I can do it. But I don't have to say the names necessarily.
Yeah, the rapporteur from yesterday's round table will come to the
I would like to invite the rapporteurs of yesterday's round table to join us at the head table.
You can read them. So you can read them.
For SDG 6, Mr. Ashok Kumar Jain. For SDG 7, Ms. April Porcheria. Sorry for mispronouncing names. For SDG 11, Ms. Bernadia Irawati Chandradewi. For SDG 12, Mr. Kamachering. For SDG 15, Mr. Douglas Nanayakara from Sri Lanka. Are we still missing someone? I think that's all of them.
15.
Are they coming? Are they here? And Sri Lanka is coming. Who's there? Okay, good. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the second day of the 5th Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development. I now invite our co-chair of the 5th APFSD, His Excellency Dr. Levan Davitashvili, to conduct the session.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, welcome to the second day of the 5th Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development, which will continue with Agenda Item 2, Regional Perspectives on the Follow-up and Review of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The first session today is the Session 4 on Assessment of Interlinkages of SDGs. The document pertinent to this agenda item is Assessment of Progress in the Implementation of Sustainable Development Goals 6, 7, 11, 12, 15 and 17 at the regional level. This session will be moderated by Professor Yoon-Mi Kim, Dean of Graduate School of International Studies and the Director of Institute of Development and Human Security at Eva Women's University, Seoul, Republic of Korea, and member of the independent group of scientists in charge of drafting of 2019 Global Sustainable Development Report. Dr. Kim is also a member of the Committee for International Development Cooperation of the Prime Minister's Office and the Policy Advisory Committees of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Gender Equality and Family. Received the Service Merit Medal from the Arawak government for contribution 4th High-Level Forum on Aid Effectiveness 2012. received the first research grant to the University in South Korea from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation of Advocacy for Korean Engagement in Global Health and Development, and Korea Global Health Strategy 2016-2019. Professor Kim, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and pleasure to be here moderating today's session. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Session 4 on assessment of interlinkages of SDGs has 3 segments. It will commence with reporting from the roundtables on Sustainable Development Goal number 6, 7, 11, 12, and 15 that were held yesterday. I have with me at the rostrum the rapporteurs who are entrusted with this assignment by the participants of the roundtables. From left to right, we have Ms. Ashok Kumar Zain, advisor of NITI Ayong, Government of India. He is the rapporteur of Roundtable on Sustainable Development number 6. Ms. April Porteria, Center for Environmental Concerns, the Philippines, rapporteur on Roundtable on Sustainable Development Goals number 7. Ms. Bernadia Irawati Sandradevi, Secretary General of UCLG ASPEC. She is the rapporteur of Roundtable on Sustainable Goals number 11. Mr. Karma Chicharing, Policy and Programming Services, National Environment Commission, Secretariat of Bhutan. He's the rapporteurs of Roundtables on Sustainable Goals number 12. And Mr. Douglas Nanyan Yakara, Secretary, the Ministry of Sustainable Development and Wildlife of Sri Lanka. He's the rapporteur of Roundtable on Sustainable Goals number 15. We will then have 2 speakers providing insights on interlinkages with a focus on the life on land, Sustainable Goal number 15, and Sustainable Cities and Communities, Sustainable Goal number 11. And I will then hand back to the chair, who will invite representatives of member states, major groups, and other stakeholders and the international community to make their statements. I would like to kindly ask the rapporteurs to try to present their minutes in about 5 minutes or less. Let me start with the roundtable of Sustainable Goal number 6. Mr. Ashok Kumar, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairperson, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it's my pleasure to report back from the roundtable and Sustainable Development Goal number 6 on clean water and sanitation that was held yesterday. The roundtable was co-organized by UNESCAP, UNESCO, ILO, UN Environment, and FAO with inputs from the UN Water. These are the policy recommendations that government representatives and other stakeholders identified in order to make further progress on SDG 6 in Asia and Pacific. Asia and Pacific has made some progress towards achieving Sustainable Development Goal 6 on water. However, the region needs to accelerate its efforts across all the sectors to ensure the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all by 2030. Acceleration can be supported by encouraging policy coherence and intersectoral coordination within and between the countries by enhancing synergies and minimizing trade-offs between sectors and goals. Water resource management within and across the countries needs further attention and requires implementation of existing policies and laws in the water sector, supported by monitoring and accountability schemes. More efforts should be made to ensure just and equitable access to water and sanitation for all, with a particular focus on women and children and the poor. Given that region faces serious scarcity issues with the lowest per capita water availability in the world, the region needs to improve and stimulate management of recycled water and other sources of water such as rainwater as a valuable resource. Governments need to design better incentives and systems to assure compliance for water management and sanitation, and stronger policies to fully eliminate water pollution. Good practices like raising awareness and promoting clean water and sanitation in relation to human rights and human health, and in the world of work, should be actively promoted. Strong attention should be paid to water-related innovations and promotion of green jobs across the countries. But it is also important to promote existing technologies that can be applied in the new sectors or new settings. All of these can only be achieved by promoting and ensuring wider participation of local stakeholders, including women, children, indigenous communities, and other valuable groups. I thank you once again.
Thank you very much for keeping the time, but also providing a very powerful message about not to leave no one behind with sustainable development goals as it regards to water and sanitation. Now, I would like to turn to Ms. April Porteria, Rapporteur for Sustainable Goal number 7, Affordable and Clean Energy. The floor is yours.
Mr. Chairperson, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is my pleasure to report back from the Roundtable on Sustainable Development Goal 7 on affordable and clean energy that was held yesterday. The Roundtable was co-organized by UNESCAP, UN Environment, UNDP, and ADB. These are the policy recommendations that the government representatives and other stakeholders identified in order to make further progress on SDG 7 in Asia and the Pacific. Achievement of universal access to energy will require additional efforts and the collaboration of all stakeholders, including governments, private sector, and the civil society. Platforms for raising awareness need to be created, and the roles of the stakeholders must be efficiently coordinated to achieve coherent actions and provide multi-stakeholder dialogue to enable improvements in the SDG 7 implementation and engage international development partners where needed. Issues of quality and reliability of energy access and availability of reliable data for monitoring need to be promptly tackled by the policymakers. National targets for clean cooking fuels and technologies should be established, and clean cooking and development on renewable energy sources must be better integrated into energy policy frameworks, taking in consideration specific cultural differences among member states. Efforts at promoting affordable and accessible renewable sources need to be urgently undertaken in order to address environmental sustainability and air pollution. Energy efficiency measures are urgent in social and public services such as transport, industry, and building sectors, and require full support through subsidies from national governments. To facilitate renewable energy and energy efficiency expansion, member states need to address existing policy barriers such as monopolistic utility positions and the lack of regulation of energy prices. With the support of ESCAP and other relevant regional institutions, member states need to develop an intergovernmental mechanism to promote equitable cross-border electricity power trade and connectivity as one of the building blocks to attain sustainable development. International energy cooperation efforts to deploy publicly available innovative technologies along with its safeguards need to be enhanced among the member states. Energy sector reform is needed to move from vertically integrated energy systems to more integrated approaches that encourage local production and state regulation in distribution and transmission, and therefore improve affordability and increase resilience to blackouts. Policy-making processes and governance should be made more transparent through appropriate control and monitoring mechanisms, as well as enhanced public participation. Energy policies need to respond to the needs of the local communities and stimulate sustainable energy projects. Small renewable energy projects are resource efficient, environmentally sustainable, and could stimulate economic growth and provide jobs and need promotion across the region. Close linkages between water, food, and energy require a suitably integrated approach to ensure water and food security, as well as sustainable agriculture and energy production. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that clear presentation. It's very clear that the Sustainable Development Goals are to be indivisible and there are strong interlinkages. So we hope to seek not just where we can find synergy, but to also reduce bottlenecks and trade-offs. So I hope we can look for ways to enhance the interlinkages for sustainable goals. Now I would like to turn to Ms. Bernadilla Eroatis and Dradewi reporting on SDG goal number 11, sustainable cities and communities. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Madam Moderator, Mr. Chair, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, very good morning, Sawadika. It's my great pleasure to report back from the roundtable on SDGs number 11, which is on make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. The roundtable was organized by UNESCAP together with UN Habitat, with input from UNDP, FAO, and other members of UN family. Actually, the room was packed yesterday. Asia-Pacific countries need to accelerate progress against SDGs 11 by empowering local governments and community groups to deliver against this goal in an integrated fashion across all SDGs and a global sustainable agenda. While it has been estimated that 65% of the total SDG targets need to be delivered by local authorities and actors, this is not matched with requisite decision-making authority required to drive local implementation of SDG 11 and all urban-related targets. Our further efforts to build an enabling environment and policy coherence across different spheres of governments for stronger progress against this goal should include the following recommendations. 1, national government partnerships with the local and regional governments and their communities in implementing and operationalizing SDG 11 should be enhanced, and greater decentralization of function to local authorities to support their effort to deliver SDG 11 on the ground should specifically focus on deepening fiscal devolution processes to address the issue of unfunded mandates, which is hindering progress against this goal. Second, inclusive implementation of this goal, specifically its social dimension, should be strengthened through more targeted commitments to empower local communities, especially associations of the urban poor, who are vital to upgrade informal settlements and leave no one behind in our cities. Number 3, innovative local examples of effective implementation of SDG 11 by local governments and a diverse range of urban communities should be documented and scaled up to accelerate progress in countries leveraging South-South learning platforms for further replications. Finally, many of the indicators under SDG 11 require data collection, including on spatial and disaggregated indicators from subnational actors to effectively measure and report on progress. So harmonization, cooperation, and capacity development aim at subnational data collectors in partnership with national statistical authorities should be a priority moving forward this goal. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Once again, a very strong message about integration and working at different levels in the government, national, regional, and local levels, and to make sure that we empower the local governments and local communities so they can play a greater role in the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I would like to turn to Mr. Karma sharing. He will now briefly report on the discussions on Sustainable Goal number 12, responsible consumption and production. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and very good morning to all. Mr. Chairman, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is my honor to report back from the roundtable on sustainable consumption and production, goal number 12, which was held yesterday. The roundtable was co-hosted by UN SCAP, UN Environment, and UNIDO. Mr. Chair, these are the policy recommendations that the government representatives and the various stakeholders gathered around 4 groups in the room. To further strengthen the implementation of SDG 12 in Asia and the Pacific, sustainable consumption and production policies should be integrated into core economic agendas and sector plans, with centralized and coordinated mechanism for SCP policies and initiatives, clearly identifying roles and responsibilities for all these stakeholders. Multi-stakeholder network should be strengthened by engaging all these stakeholders, especially scientific organizations, private sectors, civil societies, not just the government agencies. Circular economy initiatives should be promoted, and special prioritization clearly on the sustainable public procurement. Sustainable consumption and production should be seen as an enabler of other goals of SDG. Finally, Mr. Chair, governments should be encouraged and are to be encouraged to shift towards an integrated and inclusive circular economy approach by 3 ways that has been proposed. 1, identifying interlinkages across SDGs at the target level and applying a cost-benefit analysis to identify synergies and trade-offs. Number 2, strengthening statistical capacity by investing in frameworks and databases that incorporate economic, environment, and social accounts for evidence base for policymaking. Finally, number 3, establishing interministerial dialogues and consultative multi-stakeholder processes and partnership to inform inclusive and impactful policies, as well as coordinated joint implementation of a circular economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Once again, we hear that responsible consumption and production is the one that links the people in the developed world and the developing countries. So this is very critical, as we see in the Global Sustainable Development Report 2019 writing team. We find that sustainable goal number 12 is the one that would be critical in reducing the inequality that we see between countries and within countries. So I appreciate your presentation greatly. Now let me turn to Mr. Douglas Nanyanyakara, reporting on sustainable goal number 15, which is life on land. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairperson, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is my pleasure to report back from the roundtable on Sustainable Development Goal 15 on life on land that was held yesterday. The roundtable was co-organized by UNSCAP, UN Environment, UNDP, and FAO, with inputs from the One Planet Network. These are the policy recommendations that government representatives and other stakeholders identified in order to make further progress on SDG 15 in Asia and the Pacific. 1. Integrated data systems that supports ecosystem-based management, integrating information from diverse sources, including community, indigenous, and traditional knowledge. 2. Engagement across sectors and stakeholders, in particular with local communities and indigenous people. 3. Strengthened governance approaches and effective laws to promote participation, clarify land tenure arrangement, enforce the rights of indigenous people and environmental defenders, support ecosystem-based management approaches and social impact assessment, and recognize the intrinsic rights of nature. 4. Diversification of financing and linking this with strengthened improvements in governance and management approach. 5. achieving land degradation neutrality, and 6, strengthening regional cooperation, including through implementing the outcomes of the Asia-Pacific Ministerial Summit on the Environment 2017. Given the vital importance of biodiversity and ecosystem services for human survival and well-being, effective mainstreaming biodiversity across government sectors, it is essential for conservation to urgently mainstream biodiversity conservation into decision-making, including by the Ministries of Finance, Agriculture, Infrastructure, Planning, Tourism and Education, amongst others. This could be done by working in partnerships and adopting an integrated and evidence-based approach to sustainable development, planning and implementation, taking into account the links, synergies and the trade-offs between SDG 15 and other SDGs, such as SDG number 1 on poverty, SDG number 2, zero hunger, SDG 3, good health and well-being, SDG 5, gender equality, SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, SDG 8, decent work and economic growth, SDG 12, sustainable consumption and production, and SDG 13, climate action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It reinforces what we have heard throughout the rapporteur's reports, that the Sustainable Development Goals should be understood as integrated, indivisible goals, and there are great interlinkages that we should take advantage of. So the synergies or co-benefits to be enhanced while we try to reduce some of the tension between some of the goals as we see. Once again, we heard the strong need for coordination and cooperation among government ministries and at different levels of government, respect for the notion of biodiversity for people and the planet, and respect for the indigenous people and their traditional knowledge. In this age of the fourth industrial revolution, where we're talking about scientific and technological advances, we should not also forget the indigenous knowledge and technology that will be really critical for us as we move forward in harmony with nature. So I thank you very much for the presentations. Now I would like to move to the two experts on the importance of addressing the Sustainable Development Goals in an interlinked, integrated, and holistic manner. I'm very pleased to introduce the first speaker, Ms. Carol Ann Barkia. She's the Asia Pacific Regional Representative of the International Forestry Students Association, IFSA. She will speak on the importance of preserving natural ecosystems and their services as a basis to achieve transformation towards sustainable and resilient society from the perspective of a young academic. You have 10 minutes, Ms. Carol Ann Bakia.
Hello. Yes. Thank you, Madam. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, greetings. Not everyone is born lucky. In fact, a great part of the society doesn't realize how lucky they really are. I, for one, have times where I question the equality in life. Why are they born with silver spoons in their mouth? What did these people do to deserve and experience these hardships in life? I am now working at the Department of Environment and Natural Resources in the Philippines, following the footsteps of my mother as a lady forester. At the same time, I am also responsible for the International Forestry Students Association, specifically for the Asia-Pacific region, an organization of young people aimed to connect, empower, and educate forest science students, and responsible for the implementation of 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. I should say, despite this high expectation of these roles, I am still proud and inspired because I have this opportunity to influence the world with our work, showing that we, young generations, so-called the millennials, can make difference and create new perspectives. Life on land and the other SDGs. Let me share you a very short story. Joining community meetings in the remote areas in the Philippines, tree planting, coastal cleanup and hiking up in the mountains are part of my growing up years. To my young mind, I thought these are all just normal for everyone to be involved in, because according to my mother, our forest, coastal areas, and seas needs a big help, especially for the young generations. My mother is a very passionate forester. Together with my father, they raised us, my siblings, to be conscious of our actions to not harm the environment. It has always been a very striking moment for me to see the informal settlers and the people begging for food and money as I walk every morning along the sidewalks going to work. I don't miss the chance to see men, women, or even children starting their day same with me, but without a good sleep, bath, and breakfast. They start their day by begging for food and money to eat and survive. This clearly shows that life on land isn't equal to all. But there are also other impressing environmental problems like climate change, waste problems, and forest degradation. To date, statistics shows that the rate of forest loss in the world is rapidly increasing every year. Tons of garbage and toxic waste are thrown in seas every hour. Historical carbon emissions at a rate of 79% by developed countries, while the global population has an increase of 1.1% every year. Many scholars, scientists, and specialists have their own hypotheses, theories, and these are shared for the academics and some extent enacted into good laws and address the balance between human needs and wants versus the natural resources consumptions, consideration the political and economic factors. We young people will not attempt to reinvent the wheel, but perhaps it is important to focus on why things is not working and how it will be repaired given those theories and policies. But the real question is, what can we do? Have we done something to protect the environment, or are we making it worse? Think about it. We're all aware the majority of the people depend on forest and natural ecosystem, food, water, clothing, air, energy, materials for production, all necessities in order to survive. These are all accessible to most of us, but still many of us lack the opportunity to access this due to many hindrances. This is where sustainable development goals and goal of action to achieve comes into play. As cited in the United Nations Development Program report about land degradation, we are seeing unprecedented land degradation and loss of arable lands 30 to 35 times the historical rate. Drought and desertification is also in a rise each year, amounting to the loss of 12 million hectares and affects poor communities globally. Out of 8,300 animal breeds known, 8% are extinct, and 22% are risk of extinction. Life on land matters simply because life is given to us to sustainable use all resources available without compromising the needs of the future generation. Life on land is important because consumption should not exceed the value of production, which clearly shows that we should use wisely our natural resources. Forests are also linked to cultures of different countries, as it is the source of spiritual values, religious beliefs, and traditional teachings. Forests are also important for leisure, and recreation as another form of relaxation in nature, and forests heal us from stresses and frustrations. Beyond all, the integrated implementation of SDG 15 and the rest of the 16 SDGs will provide various options on how to deal with the negative impacts on forests, which contribute to most of our needs. Forests are the skeleton of our planet Earth. As what our President Salina Abraham once said, forests are the quintessential global commons and the backbones of resilient ecosystem. Forest products create livelihood by producing income-generating opportunities to its rural and urban communities. They provide home and shelter for us and most of the world's biodiversity. They provide protection in order to mitigate climate change and by securing proper nutrient and water transport and storage among its subordinates. Sustainable management of forests can provide pathways to address zero hunger, good health, well-being, affordable and clean energy, no poverty, gender equality, and among others. But what is the moral story of this? All the components in the ecosystem are linked together so that we can work together. When one fails to function, the others are affected. It may be good or bad. Since we have one same goal, our problem is that we work separately, individuality. We should ask ourselves why and start acting on the same page. We, the millennials, see ourselves as the next generation of the world leaders who will be responsible for making this world viable, livable, safe, and peaceful. But as we journey from this point onwards, we want to become part of the voice translated into politics, laws, and serve as catalysts, strategists, and leaders in our own capacity to influence others. The 2030 Agenda, what can we do to sustainably manage our forest, combat desertification, reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss in order to have resilient ecosystem? I am leaving you with SBG. S, start with yourself, and B, the start of change. B, be educated, learn and be aware of what is the status of our environment. G, get involved. By spreading awareness, supporting others in your communities. The key to our own survival is protecting our home. This message is not just a call for us foresters, but a message for the whole world. This is for everyone who, like me, are blessed and privileged to have the earth, our home, and environment, and all its resources around us. As a millennial youth and a forester, I would like to assure you that we will work with the commitment and passion for achieving the best for our communities by reconnecting, breaking down barricades, and supporting innovating movements towards sustainable management of ecosystem for the well-being of all. This is what IFSA envisions for achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Pakia. As we hear from a millennial, because the Sustainable Development Goals, when it's finished in 2030, it's really your world that we're talking about, and your powerful stories of inequality that you see around us, and what we should do together. I really am impressed with SBG. Start with yourself, myself, be educated, and get involved. This is a very powerful message from the millennial, really a clarion call for all to come to action. So thank you very much for your presentation. Now I would like to turn to Professor Wang, who is the Chief Executive of the Cooperative Research Center for Water-Sensitive Cities from Australia, to address interlinkages across the SDGs from an urban angle and from the perspective of the private sector. Professor Wang, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Professor Kim. Mr. Chair, good morning to all. I'm delighted to be here to present some of my views and the work of my research center in relation to cities. And more particularly, how do we go about thinking about operationalizing the linkages of different SDGs through the microcosm of a city? Now, why is that important? I think we all recognize that urbanization is one of the mega trends that ultimately will lead to significant concentration of population in cities. And also, I think we all appreciate that cities are in fact a microcosm, an intersection of many issues and many challenges that we face, whether it is in relation to transport, whether it's in relation to energy, to water, inclusiveness, all of that. You find that, in fact, cities tend to concentrate and magnify many of these key challenges. In relation to disasters and in relation to hazards, the level of investments in infrastructure in our city would amplify the impact of our inability to accommodate future uncertainties. Similarly, in terms of investment, it does tend to also provide the best opportunity for us to be innovative, but more importantly for us to actually really think about what it means to integrate. And this is really where I want to come from. Another key message that I'd like to leave with you is that the whole notion of interconnections and different SDGs are in fact context-specific. It's different in terms of how integration of different SDGs could be applied in the developed world compared to the developing world. And that trying to get a handle on an organizing framework that provides an understanding of the linkages of SDGs is in fact really complicated. And to make matters worse, our institutions in our cities, the way we govern our infrastructure, our social system, quite often limit our opportunity to truly integrate the different types of SDGs that we espouse. Perhaps one of the best organizing framework that I've come across is one that was developed by the Stockholm Resilience Center that actually try and look at the hierarchical status of different SDGs. The notion that the environment SDG related to life on land, life under the water, climate actions, they provide, in fact, the very foundation without which you are actually going to have difficulty supporting the realization of many of the other SDGs associated with society. Without achieving some of our societal goals in SDG, you will find that we will be hard-pressed to then realize the aspirations of SDGs related to the economy of our cities. So we need to think of and break down our understanding of the SDGs according to that hierarchical of foundation, the enabling systems that society does to actually deliver the type of economic and prosperity outcomes that we all strive for. I will give you an example of that, but I will also put to you that our current institutions, the way we organize our governance, the different departments in our government departments, the different levels of government, all currently work against our ability to integrate effectively across the SDGs. I also like to talk about resilience. In relation to resilience, I'd like to first of all acknowledge, and most of you were at the launch of the report last night, that talks about resilience in terms of our capacity, our absorptive capacity, our anticipatory capacity, our adaptive capacity, and our transformative capacity. This is not exclusive to simply building that capacity in the social system. In fact, you find that the whole notion of resilience, certainly from my perspective, is trying to strike the right balance between infrastructure resilience and social resilience. Too often, you will find that in the developed world, because of our past practices and over-reliance on technology, you'll find that many of our developed world have in fact designed out the inherent social resilience of our community. There's so many developed world that I've seen whereby we are continue to invest in building infrastructure to overcome future uncertainties of climate change, while at the same time, the community, more often than not, delegate the responsibility wholly on being resilient to climate change to government. It is investing in chasing that diminishing return in a future climate of uncertainty. We need to rebalance that. We need to think about investing more in building social resilience in addition to investing in infrastructure. Similarly, if you visit many of the cities in the developing world, and I have over the past few years been working in that area, I find that the community are incredibly resilient in terms of their understanding of the vulnerability they are in and actually coming up with significant adaptive strategy. But that is not because of anything other than the fact that infrastructure provisions are incredibly lacking. They have to fend for themselves. And for the developing world, it is important to actually think about how you would invest in infrastructure to provide a stronger basis to harness the social resilience that are currently there. Our investment strategy needs to strike the balance and rebalance this whole notion of ensuring social resilience through the community, through our governance system, through the integration of different government, as well as infrastructure investment. The key message I want to leave with you in this regard is that, of course, specific context becomes really important. And I want to move to the discussion on the notion of how do each nation actually start to think about operationalizing the integration of SDGs, particularly, of course, within the context of cities and towns, human settlements. And I already made the point that it is context-specific, and I put it to you as well, that the process of urban design and planning is a very powerful integrative platform for us to do this. But it needs to be done with strong engagement with community, the delivery of co-design, co-development of the urban design process, and appropriate investment and empowerment at different levels of government for infrastructure. I'd like to give you an example, but prior to that, I'd like to make the point that at the World Water Day some 10 days ago, UN Water published a report that actually talks about the significance of nature-based solution as part of our tools to deliver sustainability and resilience in our cities. And in that, the whole notion of nature-based solution is really a combination of nature conservation, nature restoration, and biomimicry. Within the city and towns context, the notion of biomimicry is in fact a very important component of how we can start to reintroduce nature-based solutions into our built form. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. What are some of the ecosystem services that we can expect from nature-based solutions? We all know that nature has a natural function of cleansing water. Our ability to buffer the impact of our urban development on the natural environment is actually to do with how we can introduce nature back into our cities to cleanse water, to cleanse and remove the pollution that are generated in our water. Our ability to cleanse that water immediately means that the storm water and the rainwater that falls in our city becomes a resource. It will start to build resilience linked to SDG 6 simply by diversifying our water resources, looking at our cities as, in fact, a water supply catchment. There are other things that we can do with integrating nature in our cities. The notion of flood mitigation, reduction of flood peak, and providing safe passage of flood water through a network of green corridors within our city are very important urban planning initiatives that are in fact tied to some of the aspirations of green spaces in SDG 11. And of course, the importance of biodiversity and the influencing of microclimate of those. They are just some of the ecosystem services that nature-based solutions embedded into our cities can deliver. I want to finish by giving you one example of a project that we are currently doing that really touches on this last issue, which is very important and mentioned several times in this report, leaving no one behind, and the vulnerability of slum settlements in our cities. Whether we like it or not, the process of urbanization will increase the absolute number of people living in slums. The fact is that many of our developing countries are hardly keeping up with the growing middle class in terms of infrastructure provision, that there will be a sector of people in our community that will be left behind if we do not think of different alternative solutions to servicing their basic needs. And what might they be? One of the projects that we looked at, for instance, is the notion that many of slum communities in an urban environment are living in areas that are most vulnerable, that we would normally not think about development. The traditional approach to the upgrading of slums, of resettlement, in itself has got significant unintended consequences in terms of the destroying of the cohesion of those communities and the fact that the minute you move them out, there will be a next lot of people that will come in to occupy that same space. In fact, the approach that we should think is to how do we actually start to think about providing basic services to those communities to actually help them overcome their vulnerability to a whole range of climate extremes. The approach of revitalizing slums and how that could be an exemplar of the integration of different SDGs could best be captured in the notion that we need to simultaneously address issues of their flood vulnerability in those slums, issues of safe sanitation provision, issues of improving the water quality of the environment, often where they recreate and they bathe, issues of providing security of water supply, and of course the issue of helping them develop their own microeconomy through the delivery of productive landscape. In fact, some of the work that we are now trialing and that was reported yesterday was that how do we simultaneously address those 5 issues in the way that we revitalize informal settlements. And I'd like to give you this very simple example and close off my presentation. The notion of delivering sanitation in many of those areas, in fact, could start with that by delivering decentralized sanitations. We can actually immediately improve, of course, the health of that community, but also to actually look at addressing SDG 6. One of the biggest challenges of urban slums in an urban high-density environment is the fact that it's not simply about providing them with a toilet. It is also about where does the waste go from the toilet. It is not as if we're providing sanitation services in remote communities whereby the environment has a natural capacity to assimilate the waste that comes from the toilet. In a high-density, frequently flooded environment, the environment is contaminated even though a toilet is provided. When a flood comes, that contamination distributes throughout the entire settlement. And therefore, addressing issues of sanitation must go hand in hand with addressing issues of flood vulnerability. In fact, in that notion, the provision of the toilet and our ability to address that has a direct impact on how we can ultimately improve the quality of our rivers. And that itself would contribute to improvement in river health. SDG 14, and of course, improvement in river health in many of those environments, in fact, will improve the population health, because this is where they recreate, this is where they bathe. We can also know that the improvement of sanitation and ensuring that it doesn't lead to environmental contamination as a result of the density immediately improve the groundwater system, which often is a source of water supply for those communities. And there you can see that you again address SDG 6. At the same time, nature-based wastewater treatment through constructed wetlands and other systems immediately allow us to think about cleansing that water and recovering that water as a resource, looking at issue of biosolids potentially even as a source of energy, and that helps us address SDG 7. The recovery of sewage water and how that is used to support productive landscape allows us to now start to think about building a local economy and at the same time start to introduce how that could deliver on SDG 12, on sustainable consumption and production pattern, and of course, food. At the same time, improvement in river health as a result of good sanitation improves the water environment and provide estuarine protection, which ultimately provides, again, a contribution to sustainable food production now from the aquatic environment. At the same time, productive landscape, if located on flood-vulnerable land or in land that are designated for flood detention and flood passage, immediately allows us to start to think about that system as a means of addressing the flood vulnerability of the settlement in terms of flood management. That will lead to improved drainage in those informal settlements, and the improvement of those drainage and the reduction in peak flow actually helps to support life on land. Elimination or reduction in erosion in our waterway, which ultimately feeds back to a healthy waterway. So in that regard, again, SDG 15 is being addressed, as is SDG 14. How we go about to then look at other initiatives to deliver better catchment management all contributes to SDG 15. A secondary benefit from all of these initiatives that we would do in a slum environment actually addresses a whole bunch of other SDGs that, including reduction in poverty and so on and so forth. But I guess the point and the message I want to leave with you in this last slide is that how do each country start to operationalize the integration of SDG? And I put it to you that we've got to work with the system we have. It is important that the initiatives we do, the capital works we invest in, will need to have one or more focal SDGs. It's often driven by a particular department of some sort. But having said that, it is so important for all of us to then understand the context-specific linkages amongst the SDG as part of that project. It is important for us to identify the opportunities to create multiple outcomes. It is important for us to think about a combination of structural and non-structural approaches to delivering those multiple outcomes. I put it to you that even if we start a project simply for water supply security as part of SDG 6, you will find that by opening up the dialogue with different utilities and different organizations, you can deliver your primary SDG, but now enhance the delivery of other benefits and therefore realizing that integration. There are, of course, situations whereby there'll be competing SDGs. And in that regard, you need to think through and work out what those priorities are. And finally, how we will foster co-financing and co-development among stakeholders, among different departments in your government, amongst your community in promoting the co-design of those systems. And so I put it to you as my final message is that operationalizing the integration of SDG is really where the rubber hits the road. This is where we go from high-level aspirational statements to the delivery of the outcome. And that is context-specific. The way we report it and the way we use those projects to build local capacity for integration is really where I believe the focus ought to be in our effort to integrate different SDGs. Thank you, Madam, for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Wong, for presenting us with a very comprehensive but also very concrete picture of what we need to do and how the goals can be integrated in our implementation, which should be very context-specific. I'm also drawn to the fact that 70% of the world population now lives in urban areas, but let us not forget the urban slums and the people who reside in urban slums to support these growing, sprawling cities. The wash issue, the water, sanitation, hygiene are critical in these urban slums. How we deal with and how we protect the urban slums will be critical in leaving no one behind with the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm also struck with the interdependence of the urban areas and the forestry that we just heard earlier. Inequality that is very present in the urban areas, in forests, in our societies is very critical as we think about the SDGs and how we implement them. Finally, I would like to highlight the fact that the urban planning that Professor Wong talked about should not be fighting against the environment, but really learning from the environment and from nature so that the indigenous knowledge, the knowledge that the nature has provided us, would be used in our Sustainable Development Goals. So a very holistic, integrated approach is critical as we move forward with the full implementation with the Sustainable Development Goals. And now I would like to pass the microphone to the chair of the 5th APFSD, His Excellency Dr. Livan Davitashvili, the Minister of Environment, Protection and Agriculture from Georgia, to chair the rest of the session. His Excellency.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, Professor Kim. We take important notes from this session. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, country representatives, major groups and other stakeholders and representatives of the international communities are now invited to make short statements on agenda item number 2, regional perspectives on the follow-up and review of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I will first open the floor for statements from members, associate members, then permanent observers. Once all member statements have been made, I will invite statements from intergovernmental bodies, after which I will open the floor for the representatives of UN bodies and specialized agencies, and finally to designated representatives of civil society, major groups and other stakeholders. Kindly focus your interventions on challenges, lessons learned and success stories in addressing the 2018 high-level political forum for SDG cluster in an integrated, holistic manner, and within 3 minutes, please. To begin, I would like to open the floor for statements and views from governments. Now we have a statement from Nepal. Please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving me the floor. We have now passed 2 years working on the SDGs. It would be too early at this stage to reach a conclusion, but many of us, including Nepal, have had a glimpse of where we stand now and what challenges we are likely to face in achieving the SDGs by 2030. We in Nepal have taken a clue from our performance on MDGs. We have good progress in some of the MDGs, made satisfactory achievements in some, and faced difficulties in some others. By the end of 2015, Nepal's unfinished agenda included reducing wide gap between the levels of poverty, reducing dropout rate of school students, quality education among girls, addressing disparities in child mortality rate, and reducing maternal mortality rate across geographical regions and social groups, increasing public finance for disease prevention and control, receiving ODA as committed by development partners, increasing aid effectiveness, etc. Nepal is committed to working its best towards achieving the SDGs by or before 2030. Last year, we have published SDG roadmap, which takes stock of Nepal's present development status and provides a roadmap to 2030, with intermediate milestones for 2019, 2022, 2025, and 2030. The monitoring framework in this roadmap aligns and updates national indicators with global ones. The SDG needs assessment, costing, and financing strategy also prepared last year, has articulated financial assessment for implementing SDGs plans and programs. Besides, the UN Development Assistance Framework for 2018 to 2022 is aligned with national priorities and Nepal's target of becoming middle-income country by 2030. For the realization of SDGs, we have created enabling environment in the country. The efforts include the promulgation of new constitution, which provides for inclusive socio-economic and political development, egalitarian and pluralistic society, and the elimination of all forms of discrimination, thus trying to realize the aspiration of the SDGs that no one is left behind. The government has also started mainstreaming the SDGs into national planning and budgeting system. For example, the annual programs and budgets of 2016-2017 and 2017-18 have been aligned with the SDGs by introducing SDGs coding to each and every program. The government has also formed 3 levels of committees to implement the SDGs: high-level steering committee headed by the Prime Minister, SDGs coordination and implementation committee headed by the Vice Chairman of National Planning Commission, and 9 SDGs implementation and monitoring thematic committees headed by NPC members. The private sector and cooperative sector, the civil society organization and development partners have joined hands with the government in implementing the SDGs. We have also realized that achieving SDGs is not an easy task for countries like Nepal. The challenges we face include adequate financial resources and access to technology, capacity development, horizontal and vertical coordination, and production of disaggregated data for monitoring. As we are in the formative stage of federal structure of state, localization of the SDGs that is cascading national efforts to sub-national levels and mainstreaming the SDGs agenda into, I will try to finish soon. The state and local levels remains on the major challenges. Besides making existing data generation system robust and databases in line with SDG requirement is at another. Finally, adequate finance, technology, institution, capacity, and partnership are vital for countries like ours to achieve the SDGs. These components have a systematic effect. We are hopeful that with the stable and development-oriented political environment, committed public and private sector, and support and cooperation from our development partners, we will be able to achieve the development goals within the stipulated framework time frame. Thank you.
Thank you very much, distinguished delegate from Nepal. And now I want to invite distinguished delegate from Fiji. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I will be deliberating on the assessment of interlinkages from SDGs as in Agenda 2, scheduled for Session 4. Let me begin by thanking the Secretariat for the excellent documentation. Discussion on the cluster of goals under review this year has again underscored the importance of regional action in implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development, Agenda for Sustainable Development. Where the member states lack the regional approach or dimension can complement our efforts through value addition analytic work or leveraging strategic partners to help implement the 2030 agenda. Implementing this ambitious and transformative agenda needs transformative shifts if it is to be achieved. Mr. Chair, at the COP23 conference in Bonn last year, Fiji released its 5-year and 20-year National Development Plan. The NDP incorporates the complements the 2030 agenda. In terms of SDG 6, water and sanitation, for water, 75% of Fiji's population, 78% of Fiji's population has access to a treated and reticulated water supply. In the next 5 years, government will undertake major investments to cater for long-term water supply needs. This includes grants from the Green Climate Fund through the Asia Development Bank, which will partly fund our urban water supply and wastewater management investment program. For sanitation, around 71% of the population have access to improved sanitation, including 25% that have access to sewerage facilities. Sanitation services will be improved in the next 5 years with investments to support migration from septic tanks to standardized treatment systems. For SDG 7, 90% of the population now has proper access to electricity. Lack of access in the underserviced rural and maritime areas will be addressed over the next 5 years. Currently, over 60% of electricity generated is from renewable energy sources, such as hydro, power mass, wind, and solar energy. In respect of SDG 11, Fiji is experiencing rapid urbanization with slightly over half the population living in urban areas. This is projected to increase to 56% by 2021. To create vibrant and sustainable urban centers, government in the next 5 years will focus on better development strategies, the identification and development of future growth centers, extension of town boundaries, urban waste management, beautification, disaster planning and response, upgrading and relocation of informal settlements, better traffic management, and provision of basic services. Regarding SDG 12, Fiji's Green Growth Framework has already prioritized the feasibility study for a waste management authority with a view to identifying the best model that can deliver an efficient, effective, and financially viable waste management operation.
Time.
A plastic bag levy of 10 cents has been implemented to address this major source of pollution. This is applicable to all business but implemented on a phased approach and overarching the framework and consumption and production related to food, nutritional security, is also under consideration. Only 3 more sentences, Mr. Chair. Under SDG 15, Fiji will strengthen its sustainable food management to address forest biodiversity, forest conservation, sustainable forest harvesting practices, and climate change mitigation and adaptation. Sustainable land use practices currently being implemented to relevant agencies, including the Ministry of Lands and Ministry of Agriculture. The program I have highlighted, Mr. Chair, and the cluster of goals have reviewed this year shows the interlinkages and complementarity and to some extent synergize and trade-offs. It is important to have an integrated policy approach if we are to achieve the vision of 5-year and 20-year National Development Plan of transforming Fiji. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Fiji. Are there any other governments who wish to speak before I open the floor to intergovernmental organizations? None. open the floor for intergovernmental organizations, and I want to invite the representative of International Union for Conservation of Nature.
Thank you very much, respected Chairperson. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure today to join you at the 5th Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development. I'm especially honored to be in the presence of IUCN member states from the Asia-Pacific region, NGO members, and OECD country representatives from several IUCN state members. IUCN is committed to supporting countries with integrating environmental dimensions as well as nature-based solutions into their national SDG 6 strategies. In the context of SDG Goal 6 related to clean water and sanitation, IUCN is contributing to the conservation and restoration of freshwater ecosystems by promoting improved management of wetland sites, including Ramsar sites. IUCN Asia Regional Office is acting as a secretariat for the new Indo-Burma Ramsar Regional Initiative, or IBRI, which involves the heads of the Ramsar administrative authorities in the 5 countries of Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. The overall objective of IBRI is to provide an operational means of support for the effective implementation of the Ramsar Convention and its strategic plan and its specific objectives in line with SDG 6 priorities, including promoting scientific and technical cooperation by supporting joint research on management and wise use of wetlands, promoting regional dialogues on the development of wetland conservation policies, and developing or supporting the formulation of management plans and regulatory management tools for the wetlands. IUCN has developed a suite of toolkits, resources, and training modules with over 80 partner organizations across the world to help stakeholders, including governments, develop effective agreements to manage the water resources efficiently and equitably in order to benefit the planet and people. In Asia, IUCN's approach to evidence-based decision-making has already contributed to a better understanding of the issues involved in shared transboundary management within the Ganges, Meghna-Brahmaputra basin and the Mekong basin, through projects such as BRIDGE, which stands for Building River Dialogue and Governance, and Ecosystems for Life, a transboundary initiative between Bangladesh and India. In IUCN's experience, strengthening the legal basis for transboundary water cooperation has provoked wider debate over shared natural resources, not just water, and how countries can cooperate to expand the pie. For example, IUCN is now supporting transboundary cooperation between the Republic of Korea, People's Republic of China, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea over the valuable but highly threatened ecosystems of the Yellow Sea. These are just a few examples of our relevant initiatives in the region that contribute to the SDGs, within the framework of which we are working jointly with our relevant state, government agency, NGO, and indigenous peoples members. We also want to reiterate our offer of support to all Asia-Pacific countries towards achieving their SDG objectives, specifically those related to SDG 6 as well as others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, representative of International Union for Conservation of Nature. And now I would like to open the floor for UN bodies and specialist agencies. I recognize representative from International Civil Aviation Organization. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make this statement brief. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, although sustainable transport and aviation are not represented by standalone SDGs, they are mainstreamed across several SDGs and targets. Sustainable transport, including international civil aviation, should be viewed and integrated as essential ingredients in sustainable development strategies. Sustainable transport and aviation are essential to achieving most, if not all, SDGs. I'll cite just a few examples. I mentioned yesterday the social and economic benefits of air transport are quite clear. Air transport supports 28.8 million jobs and $626 billion of GDP in Asia Pacific. It connects the world like no other mode of transport, supporting businesses and families across the globe. Aviation infrastructure lasts for decades, which means the decisions that national governments make today will have a long-lasting impact on urban development. Airports and urban development are intrinsically linked. As aviation grows, we must be environmentally responsible. The aviation sector is pushing the boundaries impacting efforts on climate change. The aviation industry has agreed on a robust strategy for reducing CO2 emissions and is making excellent progress working towards global climate goals. In October 2016, the member states of ICAO agreed on a carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, the first industry sector to do so. It will enable the industry to have a shared goal of carbon neutral growth. Moreover, in the long term, aviation aims to halve its net CO2 emissions by 2050 using 2005 as a baseline. This will be achieved through technology, innovations, commercialization of sustainable aviation fuels, and better use of navigation infrastructure and technologies. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, representative from International Civil Aviation Organization. And now I want to invite International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I deliver the following statement on behalf of IFAD as well as FAO. IFAD and FAO have consulted with the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact in preparing the statement. Mr. Chairperson, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, development efforts that promote the inclusive transformation of rural areas socially, environmentally, and economically are essential for a broader society-wide transformation in which synergies between rural and urban development are fostered to obtain sustainable outcomes and ensure no one is left behind. Many rural communities are vulnerable, fragile, and lack resilience. Factors contributing to this situation include weak institutions, conflicts over access to productive resources, degradation of natural resources, social and gender inequalities, lack of employment opportunities for youth, poor access to basic services, exclusion from decision-making and political processes, and non-recognition of rights or weak implementation of rights. Frequently, economic growth and opportunities are unevenly distributed, and rural stakeholders, including smallholder farmers, women, youth, and indigenous peoples, are all too often left behind. Unfortunately, progress in advancing social and environmental sustainability has rarely kept pace with economic progress, resulting in loss and degradation of natural resources, especially where indigenous peoples and smallholder farmers lose their rights to land. The President's summary at HLPF 2017 explicitly stated that small-scale farmers are central to all food systems and called for inclusive policy processes and partnerships and the involvement of all stakeholders. This can only be achieved if the interests and rights of rural people, especially indigenous peoples, smallholder farmers, and rural women, are integrated into discussion of all SDGs, including those under review in 2018 relating to access to water and sanitation, access to energy, making cities and human settlements inclusive, and safeguarding ecosystems. The ways in which food is produced, distributed, and consumed have particular implications for water and energy supply and demand, for the sustainability of food systems and human settlements across the rural-urban continuum, as well as for the way human societies interact with land and ecosystems. Agriculture is clearly a strategic sector because of its effects and its dependency on the natural environment, biodiversity, and ecosystems. Investments and initiatives in these areas must be beneficial for the rural people who work in the sector and depend on it for their livelihoods. Indigenous peoples are particularly important stakeholders, given the risk of their interests and rights being marginalized. I'll conclude, thank you, Mr. Chair, as well as the specific knowledge that Indigenous peoples, their communities, possess in managing and balancing social, environmental, and economic capital. Consumption and production patterns of food and other commodities shape the demand for goods that are primarily produced in rural areas. If city populations demand locally produced, diverse and nutritious food grown largely by small-scale rural producers, this represents an opportunity, especially with the development of strengthened and inclusive rural-urban linkages. In conclusion, the entire 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is a single overarching vision for the transformation of societies. In particular, the ways cities and human settlements are planned and organized, and patterns of production and consumption within them will shape outcomes across the entirety of the agenda. Integrated approaches that focus on the needs of the most vulnerable people in rural and urban areas must underpin the actions to achieve transformation of societies, both rural and urban. Mr. Chair, the challenges facing various groups in accessing water, energy, natural resources and ecosystems must be dealt with in an integrated and systemic way. The goals in water, energy, human settlements, consumption and production, life on land and partnerships offer crucial entry points to address the interests of small-scale food producers, indigenous peoples and other actors in agri-food value chains and engage them actively and as equal partners and actors in the development of their communities. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Representative from IFAD. I will now open the floor to major groups and other stakeholders in the order provided by the Secretariat. I recognize the representative from Migrant Constituency who delivers a consolidated statement. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Your Excellency, distinguished guest. Good morning. The goals for the HLP-F 2018 as well as all other SDGs are intrinsically interlinked, and this cannot be met unless a holistic approach is taken. An integrated approach across the three pillars of sustainable development, environmental, economic and social, is also essential. For example, Goal 11 is linked to the goals on poverty, food security, critical public service such as health, education, water and energy. The world of work, climate change, access to justice, and must be read and implemented along with linked targets under these other goals. Its targets also cut across all three dimensions. Therefore, in order to meet Goals 11, all its targets as well as linked targets in other goals must be met. Another crucial goal that is one of the foundations needed to support sustainable cities, sustainable economies and well-being is Goal 15, life on land. As many of the goals, designing, planning and implementing of other goals need to strongly take into consideration its importance, whether it may be mitigation to climate change, marine conservation, water, migration, peace and conflict, growing urban poor, sustainable cities and others. Three integration challenges can be overcome through appropriate policies that are carefully designed and implemented based on the principle of indivisibility of human rights and with active participation of the people. Attention should be given to moving away from narrow sectoral approaches, progressing towards full cross-sectoral coordination and cooperation, ensuring coherence between the legislative and executive branches of state power, other state authorities, local self-government, civil society institutions, and the business community regarding the goals and ways of the country's development, as well as the willingness to share responsibility for jointly adopted decisions. The importance of collective planning supported by the shared implementation responsibility of implementation through a coordinated process at micro and macro level must not be undermined. Governments must conduct proper policy coherence, mapping and planning for institutional coherence. Engagement and full integration of stakeholders and rights holders in mainstreaming, especially of civil society, remain critical. But most important, communities showcase the perfect example of integration between sectors and the three dimensions of sustainable development. Governments need to work with grassroots communities and underrepresented constituencies such as rural population, farmers, women, indigenous people, small business, and worked both in planning, implementation, and monitoring of their policies and programs to ensure the interlinkages and integration issues are addressed. This should include safe, inclusive, and progressive representation of groups at risk like LGBTIQ, migrants, women, human rights, and environmental defenders, people with disabilities, persons affected by HIV, and stateless persons in all platforms related to SDGs in national, regional, and international advocacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, representative of Migrant constituency. Now I invite representative of Women constituency, please.
Hello everyone. I'm speaking on behalf of the Women's constituency of the Asia-Pacific Regional CSO Engagement Mechanism. Women's human rights are crucial to achieving Agenda 2030 and sustainable development. The very principles that human rights are invisible and interconnected must be the foundational guidelines for the SDG monitoring and implementation. As a Pacific woman, in all their diversity, understand that the patriarchy manifested in fundamentalism, neoliberal globalization, conflicts, and militarism is the structural driver of deepening inequalities and undermines women's sexual and reproductive health and rights. Climate change, for instance, is a result of deliberate political and economic decisions of the powerful few countries and large corporations, and disproportionately affects women and girls negatively. Women and girls are more likely to die in the natural and climate disasters, loss of livelihood leaves affected communities only with the option to migrate, resulting in women working in informal, exploitative, unregulated labor sectors, significantly eliminating women's access to public and quality healthcare systems, and puts them at a high risk of trafficking and sexual and gender-based violence, and with little access to justice systems. We acknowledge the efforts made by the member states. However, as heard in many of the roundtables raised yesterday, there is still a wide gap in ensuring women's human rights between all of the goals. We support the strengthening of local communities' control and access over their natural resources, knowledge, and energy systems. Women, especially indigenous women, have been the keeper of their communities' resources and have been there for centuries. We support the idea of an investment in the commons, in public transportation, public green space, public housing, in water, in electricity, designed to deliver both climate and gender impact. We believe in supporting small food producers in their agroecology, farming practices, and small-medium enterprises in which women are more likely to be found in. What is the most significantly requested of member states is to deliver on the aspirations of Agenda 2030, a foundational shift, to boldly understand and claim that to live free from discrimination and violence is a basic human right, that poverty is a systematic denial of all human rights. Education, healthcare, clean water, sanitation are not only public goods, but basic human rights. Cooperation between countries is international human rights obligation, and that human rights cannot exist in isolation. They are invisible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative of Women constituency. Other statements will follow in next session. So now I thank you for all contributions and for an excellent segment. Before we start with the next session, I will, while preparing the podium for the next session speakers, I would like to invite Dr. Stefanos Fotiou, Secretary of the Forum and Director of the Environment and Development Division of ESCAP, to present an overview of the SDG Help Desk, which I understand was developed to assist member states in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development and the SDGs. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we're presenting to you the newly developed SDG Help Desk, which is a platform to serve as a one-stop gateway to knowledge products and platforms, tools, methodologies, as well as requesting opportunities for technical assistance and learning training to support ESCAP member states in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. And I'm kindly asking my colleagues to put the video on. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I will give it to the MC for some announcements now before we go to the next session.
Thank you. I kindly ask everyone to remain in the room. We will continue without a break with the next session. I kindly ask the panelists, the remaining panelists for session 5 on voluntary national reviews to take their seats reserved for the panelists on the far right side of the room. Kindly do remain in your seats. We will continue shortly. Thank you for your patience. I now invite our chair, His Excellency Dr. Rajiv Kumar, to conduct the session.
That's all. Good morning, everybody. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the meeting is now called to order. It's an honor for me to assume the responsibilities of session chair for our consideration of agenda item number 3, strengthening the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And the session will discuss national perspectives and progress through the lens of the voluntary national reviews. The document pertinent to this agenda is a synthesis report on the voluntary national reviews submitted by the Asia-Pacific countries at the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development in 2017, which is SCAP/RFSD/2018/2. And I would like to request the moderator, Mr. Stefanas Fotio, to take over the session. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome again, Excellencies and distinguished delegates. This session will feature a dialogue between countries who have already presented their voluntary national reviews either in 2016 or 2017, with those preparing to do so in 2018. The countries have very kindly accepted this format and have been twinned up to facilitate the sharing of experiences and lessons learned. Given we have 8 reporting countries in 2018 and 8 twinning partners, we will be taking these country pairs in segments. There will be also an opportunity for civil society and other stakeholders to reflect on the VNR process between the segments. To start the first segment, I would like to ask His Excellency Mr. Varan Kasoyan, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, Director of the Department of International Organizations and Human Rights, Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Armenia, who will be representing its VNR in 2018, and His Excellency Mr. George Saravasvidze, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs from Georgia, who presents in 2016 to sit on my right. And also Ms. Siren Sandhu, Director of Global Development Policy, Multilateral Development and Finance Division of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade from Australia, who will also be presenting its VNR in 2018. And Mr. Katoro Katsuki, Director, Global Issues Cooperation, Division of International Cooperation Bureau of Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, who will represent its review in 2017, to sit on my left. Yes, please. Thank you very much. We will start with Australia process. Dear Ms. Sandhu, I understand you have a specific question on data that you would like to ask our distinguished delegate from Japan, Mr. Katsuki. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. My question is to Japan. Japan puts the use of scientific data at the core of its recommendations for the future, outlining how science, technology, and innovation can be used to implement the SDGs. My question is, how did Japan work with domestic agencies, non-government organizations, and the private sector to conduct its VNR? And how will they monitor and publish data in the future, including the next VNR?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Australia and colleague, for that question. For Japan, last summer at the HLPF, our foreign minister, then Foreign Minister, Minister Kishida, delivered his VNR. And specifically on your question, how we prepared for that, just to give a little bit of information for those who are going to prepare for this year's HLPF. In 2016, that's the first year of implementation of SDGs, our Prime Minister established a SDGs headquarters, and having all the cabinet members participate. So literally we took a all-government approach to work on SDGs. And together with the SDGs promotion headquarters, we launched this roundtable, which has 14 outside representatives, so that their voices could be duly heard while we prepare on SDGs implementation. And among them, for instance, we have people from the private sector companies like the Japan Keidanren, which is the Federation for Large Japanese Companies, and we have representatives from them. And also we have, there's an institution called GPIF, which invests our pensions fund. And they have people there. Also, we have people from the academia, including like deans from institutions. Also, we have participants from 3 NGO groups. And altogether, we have 14 outside specialists. And every time we have a headquarters meeting, we hold a roundtable before that, so that their voices would be duly heard. So we did that preparation in 2016, and towards the end of 2016, through that process, we formulated a SDGs guiding principles, which literally we internalized the SDGs, and we kind of sorted it out in 8 areas, and what we did with the 8 areas was we assigned each ministry to take care of each policy which is related to SDGs. And together with that, we outlined some KPIs and indicators that they need to work to move forward. And so we did that preparation during 2016. And then 2017 in July, direct preparation towards HLPF, we convened the roundtable meeting that I mentioned, and we made sure that all the voices were heard. And then we had the headquarters meeting. And with that preparation, our foreign minister was prepared, and then he delivered our VNR. So that was the process we took. And through that process, we kind of made sure that the indicators would also be addressed. Also, the voices of the outside would also be voiced. And so so as a follow-up to our last year's VNR, end of last year, our Prime Minister also convened another round of the SDGs headquarters meetings. And there, as a follow-up, he ordered us to work on like 3 pillars specifically. First one is private companies and SDGs. The second pillar is local governments and SDGs. And the third pillar is a thematic pillar, which is addresses youth and women empowerment. And for instance, on the first pillar, what we did was we are tying up with our private companies, and the Japan Keidanren, which I mentioned, they have already issued a new charter for corporate behavior, which outlines what that they will work on SDGs through their Society 5.0 initiative, which they're working on currently. So we are doing all these follow-ups. And then specifically on the indicators, I think last year the global indicators were officially formulated during the summer last year. Of course, there was discussion during the springtime. So during our VNR presentation, well, it was in the process of formulation. But what we are doing now is that we have, since the 232 global indicators have been decided, we are now allocating each one of those to each ministry that is responsible. And we have just started to work on actual implementation and coming up with actual figures for those indicators. So what we're doing now is looking into 2019. And I believe during the General Assembly, there will be a leaders meeting to follow up on SDGs. And we are looking into updating our guiding principles that we set up in the end of 2016, and through that process we will use the new indicators. Also, we will update ourselves with the global discussion on SDGs, and then internalize those. But also, speaking of indicators, among the 232, I think yesterday the representative from Russia will also touch upon this point. But even for a developed country like Japan, some of the indicators, even for us, to really come up with the data that is mentioned there, some are pretty difficult. So I think as with other member states, what we are trying to do now is to internalize whatever there is. And if there is any area that is a little bit difficult or whatever, then we will try to come up with something that goes along the lines of the global indicators, so that we can catch up with this whole process. And well, for SDGs, I think this outside-in approach is very important, and it's very important to have actual data, as we move forward, or otherwise it will be just talking. So our government will try our best to work on those indicators, and for that, our roundtable that we have established, is working as very well, because especially from NGO representatives, we have very frank views on certain aspects of those, and so that helps us try better to really meet the global indicators and what they're trying to suggest. So, well, that's the way we are proceeding, and I hope that gives a little bit of information for those who are going to prepare for this year's HLPF. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Katsuki, for this very comprehensive process, and also how much you mentioned about the diversity of sources you have for data, including other stakeholders and not only the government. I will turn now to Mr. Kasoyan from Armenia, which I understand that you have prepared a question for a distinguished delegate from Georgia, Mr. Sarvasidze, on main challenges and lessons learned. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for convening this panel and for the possibility to speak and also pose questions to more experienced VNR presenters, let's say. The question that I have for our Georgian counterpart is more, let's say, wider. Which were the main challenges, main outcomes and lessons learned at the national level in the country from your experience of the 2016 VNR process? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Well, Georgia made first voluntary review in 2016 with the objective to share our good faith efforts of mainstreaming the SDGs into country's strategic documents and objectives. Georgia has launched an intensive process of incorporating the SDGs into national goals, aligning them with country's strategic priorities. The nationalization process of SDGs was guided by the global level of ambition, but taking into account national circumstances. Goals and targets were set considering national context, challenges and opportunities. Through the several rounds of consultations, 17 goals and nearly 100 targets have been identified as national priorities. During the subsequent consultations, specialists from the line ministries of Georgia have worked with international experts to define the verifiable indicators for tracking the progress towards mentioned targets. A baseline has been fixed for each one. Complementary national indicators were set and quantitative projections made for the 2030 horizon. To extend the dialogue on SDGs implementation across the country, the government of Georgia established the SDG Coordination Council in May 2017. The council will build a robust structure of thematic communities such as peace, justice, human rights, governance, and so forth, to mobilize technical expertise around its key thematic issues. We have also initiated an innovative approach to develop an electronic monitoring system that enables effective and transparent monitoring of the national agenda of UN Sustainable Goals. The electronic monitoring tool will enable the distribution of up-to-date information about the performance of public agencies on all relevant targets of the SDGs and will be used as a monitoring tool to hold various governmental agencies to high standards of transparency and accountability. From 2015, the government of Georgia is fast-tracking reform of the policy planning system. Our efforts to date have been aimed at setting a solid methodological foundation for the full inclusive review process, which will fully integrate SDGs into national policy planning process and contribute to successful implementation of its objectives. With this, Georgia is explicitly aligning its national policies with the SDGs, transforming each of its commitments into a specific policy outcome which addresses a national development challenge. The ownership for SDG priorities is achieved through horizontal integration of the SDG indicators with priority areas of EU-Georgia Association agenda, socio-economic development strategy of Georgia, national human rights strategy, and public administration reform, setting the course for government actions. Georgia has launched a comprehensive 4-point reform plan targeting social and economic development of the country. Georgian reforms actually will be discussed at the side event today, and we strongly encourage the delegates to take part where these reforms will be discussed more broadly. We do believe that effective governance with transparent and accountable institutions is the key for building peaceful and inclusive societies and for sustainable development. Yes, last year Georgia became chair of Open Government Partnership. The priorities of Georgia's chairmanship will be achieving 4 key goals: strengthening co-creation, citizen engagement, advancing transparency in the fight against corruption, generating innovation in public service delivery, and building a better partnership within OGP. And in July this year, we will be organizing 5th OGP Global Summit in Tbilisi. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Excellency. Before we conclude and to finish this round, I would like to ask Ms. Sandu and Mr. Kasoyam to share and highlight one key message that you would like to share with all the participants about your preparation of your VNR. Ms. Sandu, please.
Thank you, Chair. My key message is obviously will be around data. Collating data that pertains to the Global Indicator Monitoring Framework has been a challenge for Australia in the preparation of our VNR, as it is for many countries, and this point was highlighted by my Japanese colleague. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has worked closely with our National Statistics Office, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and across whole of government to identify relevant data sources. Australia's VNR has been a whole-of-government effort to identify what data sources we currently hold and whether they match any of the 232 indicators. In consultation with the Australian Bureau of Statistics, each government agency with responsibility for reporting against the SDGs has considered both ABS data and other data set as against the SDG indicators. Through this process, we have learned that an exact match between data we already hold and the SDG indicators is challenging. But what we have also found is that outside the SDG indicators, we hold a lot of data that also contributes to telling our story on performance against the SDG goals and targets. This is exactly what was expected when the framework was being designed and when it was adopted, that the SDG indicators will be complemented by indicators at the national levels. For example, the Australian government launched the National Cities Performance Framework in December 2017. This performance framework provides data on the productivity and progress of Australia's 21 largest cities. The performance framework includes data on jobs and skills, infrastructure and investment, livability, digital opportunities, governance and housing. These are highly relevant to the SDGs, including SDG 8, SDG 9, and SDG 11. Regardless of whether the data we are using is a direct match to the SDGs indicators or not, the key imperative issue is to use the data that we do have to consider our performance against the goals and targets. And the key message is using accurate, reliable and timely data to inform policy decisions is critical. We look forward to continue working with all our regional partners in the data space. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sandu. Mr. Kasoyan?
Thank you, Stefanos. The mere fact that 47 countries have volunteered to undergo the 2018 national review process under the theme Transformation towards Sustainable and Resilient Societies speaks for itself. Armenia is also among those countries who has volunteered to present its first national review to the ECOSOC HLPF. We certainly recognize the central role of the HLPF in reviewing the implementation process of the Sustainable Development Goals. The report that we are preparing, the report should reflect the measures taken for the implementation of the SDGs in the countries. However, while it is important that the VNR process platform remains political, it should not be regarded as a platform for political speculations. Our experience is that there should be a certain distinction between political and politicized. Availability of reliable, relevant, and valid data for measuring the progress of is of critical importance for the successful functioning and any follow-up to the review mechanism. Armenia has been actively involved in the improvement of coordination of statistical activities, identifying gaps in development of official statistics, exchange and data sharing. I'm also pleased to inform you that National Statistical Service of Armenia has developed a global metadata of relevant documentation on all indicators. This work has been based on the experience of the United States, which has also developed similar national reporting platform. This work will help us a lot to assess current state of affairs with regard to the SDGs. The Agenda 2030, the nationalization and implementation process of the SDGs, compel us to consolidate our national institutions, review the gaps in our national legislation that hinders the implementation of the goals and targets. It is a long process that requires consolidation of efforts and certainly patience, both at national and international and regional levels. It is a stress test that reveals the shortcomings and gaps at national and international levels. It is also obvious that we will not be able to tackle all the issues of Agenda 2030 by 2030. But if we take the Agenda 2030 seriously and sincerely, step by step, work towards the implementation of it, cooperate and assist at regional and international level, I'm sure we can narrow the scope of the challenges that we have today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the four distinguished delegates. I would like to thank them for the very insightful they gave to the panel. So thank you very much. You can return to your seats, and I would like to invite now our panelists from Bhutan, India, Kiribati, and the representative from the Pacific Island Secretariat to join me for the second round. While our panelists are taking their seat, I would like to invite Ms. Vanum Pambilum from Climate Watch Thailand to reflect and share their experience from the perspectives of a civil society organization in helping countries preparing their reviews.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, Excellencies, and ladies and gentlemen, VNR is one of the mechanisms to hold governments accountable and transparent. With the experiences of civil society organizations in Thailand, the VNR preparation in Thailand was a closed process. Very limited CSOs who have been working closely with the government, only those were invited. There was no inclusive consultation and exchanges between the government and the broader range of CSOs, especially those representing the marginalized and the grassroots. The CSO platform called Thailand HLPF Alliance was then established in order to voice and to monitor the accountability and also the reporting of the government. The HLPF Alliance is to voice the concerns and represent the voices of the local and marginalized groups. And finally, during the VNR preparation, CSOs were able to finally prepare a People's Independent Report and submit it to the government, but comments and suggestions were not included in the VNR of Thailand. We have seen in that process as a beginning and the first step of taking stock of the progress the government has been doing. We see VNR as an accountable mechanism to follow up and review the SDG progress and to ensure the government's accountability and transparency to the peoples. Without addressing the challenges on the ground, without inclusive, meaningful engagement of a wide range of civil societies, grassroots and communities, and all different groups in the society, the transformative change reported in the SDG documents and plans and policies will not be achieved. We also need to think about new modalities and inclusive mechanisms to ensure the accountability and transparency. And more importantly, we need to think about inclusiveness, where all groups are included in the planning, designing, and decision-making and monitoring processes of the SDG. Secondly, representation. In the case where CSO's representation is needed, the process needs to be effectively communicated through CSOs, who will manage their nomination and selection process themselves. This will ensure meaningful and effective representation. Lastly, on the contents, this refers to the establishment of the indicators of the SDGs. Indicators need to reflect aspiration of the goals and will respond to the challenges and expectations to overcome them. And these inclusive engagements of all groups and in identifying the challenges and establishing the indicators will ensure their directions and meaningful participation in order to achieve the SDGs. Accountability should not begin and end with the national reports to the HLPF. There are currently no subnational bodies of the SDG review and a disconnect between national plan and the local plans. Local indicators are also needed in order to help facilitate and also ensure that people are engaged and in the review and also in the monitoring process. Otherwise, the VNR will be just a showcase for the government. I thank you.
Thank you. I will proceed without further delay from my side on the next group of countries we'll have, and I will start with Mr. Karma Chering from the National Environment Commission from Bhutan, who is presenting its VNR in 2018. And I understand, Mr. Chering, you have a question for Mr. Ashok Kumar from the Niti Ayog from India, who presented its review in 2017.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And good morning once again. It is an opportunity and honor to be here. I think this is a very timely forum for us since we are preparing this Vienna. I would like to ask the delegate from India on the challenges that it had encountered in the area of stakeholder consultation. And what was what it did in terms of overcoming such challenges. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Niti Ayog, which is National Institution for Transforming India, which is a national think tank, and the Prime Minister is the chairperson for this organization. It has been entrusted the responsibility for overseeing the implementation of SDGs, which itself indicates that the Government of India at the highest level is very serious about the implementation of this agenda. In fact, Niti Ayog has mapped all the central ministries and the departments as well as various programs of Government of India and initiatives on each SDG and its targets. And each target, there are more than one ministries who are implementing the program so that it establishes the interlinkages. This also entrusts the clear responsibility to each the ministry and the departments accordingly in Government of India. Similarly, the sub-national governments at the state level have also carried out this exercise. As you have asked about the national consultation, we have conducted already more than 20 national as well as regional or sub-national consultations on various SDGs, including the capacity building and localizing the SDGs. In each consultation, the ministries of Government of India, subnational governments, CSOs, NGOs, think tanks, research organizations, as well as the local governments have participated. After conducting the national consultation at Delhi, we have also gone at the various states and regional levels also, based on the requirements of that region. For example, we did one specific consultation on the coastal areas in a city called Cochin in Kerala, which is a coastal city, and where we had invited only the coastal states and union territories so that their specific problems are identified. All these inputs which have been received during these consultations have been very useful in our policy formulation and the implementation. We have also conducted the multi-layer consultation for carrying out the exercise on formulating the national indicators on SDGs. The Niti Aayog has written to all the heads of the governments in the sub-state, sub-national level, as well as all the ministries to carry out the SDG agenda in all their programs, whichever they are implementing, and also built into their capacity building programs, so that the people are made aware and sensitized on the SDGs. Then the subnational governments have also carried out an exercise to set up their SDG cells for implementation and overseeing the implementation. The most important point which I wanted to highlight here, the lower house of the parliament is also very active in SDG implementation. Each session of the parliament, there is a discussion on SDGs, and our honorable speaker of the Lok Sabha, that is lower house of the parliament, is taking a lot of interest. A national task force has been constituted for implementation and overseeing the implementation. The last point is, India is now almost at the final stage of completing the national SDG board, dashboard for regularly monitoring the implementation and overseeing its implementation in the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumar. I will turn now to colleagues from the Pacific, and I would like to ask Ms. Auriba Riari, which is a sector economist in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development of Kiribati, who will be presenting VNR in 2018, to pose the question that has prepared for Ms. Sarmina Saili, which is the Regional Planning Advisor from the Pacific Islands Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and Kandaban in Maori. With the 2030 Agenda commitment of leaving no one behind, stakeholder consultations and engagement with rural and out-island communities is challenging for Kiribati, given the scattered and isolation of Kiribati's 33 islands and the limited national capacities and resources available for a wider consultation. For this, I'd like to hear and learn more from someone experienced on stakeholder consultation and engagement. Chamina, to what extent did Samoa consult with rural and out-island communities, and how did Samoa report back on the implementation? Thank you.
Maori and Talafalava, is this working? Ione, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, thank you, Ione, for the very important and complex question. I make this presentation on behalf of the government of Samoa. Ione, like Kiribati, Samoa is a very small island state with only about 200,000 people. So our administrations and capacities are very small and limited. And therefore, when we make global commitments like the SDGs, we always try to integrate it into our own national processes of planning and reporting. And we try not to set up parallel systems. Ione and Excellencies, the SDGs in Samoa Pathway are not new to Samoa. They are the same aspirations that are present in our past and our current national development strategy. It therefore made a lot of sense for us to embed the VNR process in our own national planning and monitoring processes. So the midterm review for our national development strategy also became the VNR process consultation for us. Ione, being a very small and very limited resource country, my government understood the critical role of civil society, private sector, our traditional leaders and our church leaders in our national development. And therefore, my government truly believes in inclusive policy making, which includes all our key stakeholders in determining what our national priorities are and also determining what our collective results are as a nation and as a people. In terms of your question on consultations, well, our consultations were very extensive because, as I noted, it was part and parcel of our midterm review, which started in early 2015. So it extended over a whole year's period up to early 2015. So consultations were held in, unlike Kiribati, we're very fortunate we don't have the large span of islands that you do. We have only 7 small islands, and they're very compact. So we didn't have the challenges that you do. But in terms of stakeholder consultation, we do consult extensively with all our key stakeholders, and in particular paying attention to our most vulnerable communities, especially our women, our children, people living with disabilities, as well as our LGBT communities. Now, in terms of case studies, that was your last question, we did not have to introduce a new process for identifying our case studies because we have a very well-developed sector planning and reporting process which identified good practices, which we used in our VNR report. And finally, I'd like to leave 2 key messages for you, which I hope will be helpful. First of all, in Samoa, we took full ownership of the SDGs because we saw and recognized it in our own national aspirations and our priorities. And second of all, we leveraged and used our own existing resources. So therefore, the SDGs consultations were not an additional burden, were not require additional resources because it was part and parcel, it was budgeted for, and it was part and parcel of our own process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before we conclude the round, I would like to ask Mr. Chering and Ms. Riari for just very quick 1-minute comment on lessons, on key messages that they would like to share on preparing the VNRs. Mr. Chering.
Thank you once again. Before I go into this, I just wanted to again take this opportunity to inform in terms of our processes and some of the lessons that we've learned. Bhutan is totally committed to implementation of Agenda 2030 and SDGs. And this has been now integrated into our national 5-year plan, socio-economic development plan that Bhutan undertakes. The Cross-National Happiness Commission, which is chaired by the Prime Minister, is the central agency responsible for planning and coordination of the socio-economic development and the SDG. Now, it has been the Cross-National Happiness Commission has been mandated to monitor the effective implementation of the SDGs. To that effect, the high-level multi-sectoral working committee has been formed to oversee and to ensure the smooth implementation of SDGs. Mr. Chair, Bhutan is one of the countries that has volunteered to report for the upcoming session in July. And then I think similar to the countries who have reported and who is undergoing this process, Bhutan has also undergone a very extensive and consultation processes involving government, private sector, NGOs, through the support of UN agencies. It is also, to some extent, the preparation of this report is done by our internal national expert as well as the national officials from the different agencies. I think coming down to the challenges that we are facing, I think, and similar to many other countries, one of the major challenges is still in the data. I think our director from the National Statistical Bureau during his presentation yesterday also highlighted the issue in terms of the data. Data is very, very important. I think everybody understands, and it is very much critical for the decision makers and for the policy and the implementation. So in that sense, it is very, very important and critical for the SDG implementation goals. Just wanted to reiterate again of what our director yesterday mentioned in terms of the SDG indicators and the alignment to the existing data. As per the record, only 4% are reliable or available, 27% are partially available, and 39% are not available. So of the 7 goals, the availability of data for the areas of energy, infrastructure, and governance are very, very minimum. So from that perspective, I think I do not need to really emphasize on the importance. Besides that, I think these other challenges that we are facing in terms of this particular Vienna and implementation of the SDG is the technical capacity, lack of technical or the limited capacity, or the experts in terms of the SDG in itself. And then the funding is one of the major challenges. So with this, I think I'll leave with a very small key message, or in the sense that what I have gathered through this consultation. It is very much obvious that data is the critical thing, and then the stakeholder engagement from various agencies, including individual level, is the key for the success of the implementation of SDG. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So, Ms. Riari, your message, please.
Thank you. Greetings again. I'd like to take this opportunity to share and highlight one key message regarding the VNR process for Kiribati, and this is turning the challenge into an opportunity. Considering the shortage of time for Kiribati to do the VNR report, which is only 6 months, no budgeting, and the limited capacity and resources available in the country, we try to grab existing national resources and opportunities, including international and regional supporting mechanisms, such as the Pacific Roadmap. Because we don't have a budget and the timeline is very short, therefore for any national workshop carried out by either government agencies or non-government bodies, the VNR working team then made proposals to the organization to allow the VNR team to have a space on their program to make awareness on the SDGs and the VNR, and to invite their views and ideas, data, and stories for enhancing ownership of the report. Again, with time, financing, and technical constraints, Kiribati tends to utilize existing regional and international supporting mechanisms. For the VNR process, the UNESCAP and SPC assists with the indicators and data mapping, the UNDP and PIFs in supporting stakeholder consultation and peer learning. In mid-April next month, Kiribati will be having a South-South cooperation with Samoa through the Pacific Roadmap. PIFs is also supporting the VNR working team and the local film producer on the production of the documentary video that will go with the VNR report. Despite all the challenges we faced and our country's determination to do the VNR report, we are grateful for having these national, regional, and international opportunities and supporting mechanisms in place, as these allowed Kiribati to turn the challenges into opportunities. With sincerity, I'd like to thank on behalf of Kiribati, the government and its people, the PIFs, SPC, UNDP, and UNESCAP for their great support and assistance to the VNR process and making the preparation of Kiribati VNR report a success and a fruitful experience. Kiribati cannot do this alone, but with collaboration internally and externally, we will achieve our goals: health, peace, and prosperity. I thank you on behalf of the government and people of Kiribati. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank our panelists and invite them to go back to their seats. Thank you very much. And I would like to invite now our panelists from Laos, People's Democratic Republic, Indonesia, Singapore, and the Republic of Korea to join me. And while our panelists take the seat, I would like to invite Ms. Karina Imonen, the UN Resident Coordinator in Laos PDR, to reflect on experience in helping countries prepare their VNRs. Ms. Simonon, the floor is yours for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Moderator, Excellencies, distinguished delegates and participants. I would like to thank you, first of all, for allowing me to share the experience on the voluntary national review from the perspective of the United Nations in Lao PDR. I would also like to use this opportunity to thank the government of Lao PDR for the strong leadership, commitment, and continued close collaboration with the UN system around the Agenda 2030. Allow me to highlight 3 areas that have been important in the VNR process. First, Lao PDR has shown strong ownership and leadership from the start. The SDG Steering Committee is chaired by the Prime Minister, with the Foreign Minister and the Minister of Planning as Vice Chairs. SDG focal points have been nominated in all key government institutions, and these convened regularly. Lead institutions have been designated for each SDG and SDG indicator. The government has developed a clear timeline for the VNR, and this has been done early in the process. I would also like to underline the importance of stakeholder engagement, as involving people in the development crucially reinforces the sustainability of development. While the short time in the lead to the VNR may not be sufficient for putting in place a full engagement process, the VNR can be an opportunity to enhance structures for systematic stakeholders' engagement beyond the VNR. The question of language is also closely related to the national ownership and engagement. The VNR is now being prepared in English. The draft is currently being translated to Lao national language for consultation, and the final version will be translated again. Linked to the first point on ownership and engagement, as second key element for the VNR and for the Agenda 2030, I would like to highlight the importance of systematic coordination both in terms of a whole of government approach and in terms of the UN system support to the government. Given the need to coordinate a large number of partners, it is beneficial for the VNR process to start as early as possible. In the case of Lao PDR, discussions around the national SDG indicators started in early 2016, and the review from MDGs to SDGs was developed under government leadership in 2017, laying the technical foundation for the 2018 VNR. In addition to the government coordination structure, we also have a strong UN coordination setup, and we have developed a joint UN offer of support to the VNR, bringing together expertise of UN country team and non-resident agencies, including UNESCAP and UNDESA. Additional interagency support is being provided by the UN SDG focal points and the UN Monitoring and Evaluation Group. And as a third and final point, linked to the first two, I would like to highlight the importance of reliable, quality, and disaggregated data. The SDG indicators have been incorporated into Laos's national plan and are continuously being integrated also into the sectoral plans. Many of the SDG indicators were new, and it was not clear from the outset which government institution would be in the lead on which of the indicators. Given data limitations, global indicators were in some cases adjusted to the national context. The UN system is also providing coordinated support to the government on producing disaggregated, reliable, quality data to diagnose development issues and to identify those most left behind. We expect that a comprehensive statistical overview across all national SDGs indicators will be included as a statistical annex to the VNR. I hope these points are helpful. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Imonen. We'll go straight to the third round of discussion with countries, and I would like to ask Mr. Wagner Keo, which is the Director General of International Organizations Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Lao People's Democratic Republic, who will be presenting VNR in 2018, to pose his question to Ms. Umi Yanti Silahali, which is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. So, first of all, I'd like to express our gratitude for giving us an honor to be present at this August forums. On behalf of the Laos delegations, I'd like to ask actually our Indonesian colleagues, since we are also member of ASEAN, and respectively Indonesia is actually the biggest nations in Southeast Asia. However, Laos is probably the smallest in terms of the populations, because we are only 6 million or 7 million peoples, while Indonesia has such a big, and is it 250 million populations? Yeah, so the question is about on the awareness raisings in Indonesia, how that your country is instill a sense of the ownerships amongst the lines, governments, ministries, and the local entities, and what are the initiatives that have so far been undertaken to adapt the SDGs targets to your national circumstances? And please, can you tell how does the leave no one behind philosophy has been interpreted in Indonesia? Thank you.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank UNESCAP and APFSD committee for facilitating these twinning partner sessions. And I would like to thank Lao PDR for the very thoughtful question and wishing all the best for the preparations. Indonesia's strategy for raising awareness for ownership to the Vienna report basically consists of many strategies. I would like to list first the importance of political leadership in the implementation of the SDGs. Since the beginning of 2016, just after the adoption, we already prepared the draft of presidential decree and officially being enacted in 2017. This presidential decree has been guideline for coordination between all stakeholders that involves government, CSO, academics, business, philanthropists, or what we call the 4 platforms. Second, there are co-coordinators who led the VNR preparation effort. The process of ours was jointly coordinated by Ministry of National Development Planning, particularly the Deputy for Maritime and Natural Resources Affairs, and also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So these 2 co-coordinators will lead the VNR preparation effort later on. The third, we also established the informal task force coordinated by Ministry of National Development Planning and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The structure and membership of this task force allowed the implementation consists of relevant stakeholders, the government, parliament, CSO, media, philanthropy, and businesses. So this task force further organized into smaller working groups for each SDG goal being reviewed. The 4th one is identifying relevant ministries to be involved and ask them to make commitment professionally and as well personally to the process of the VNR preparation. There will be one of the coordinator in each goal being reviewed. And relating to the local entities, last year team eradicating poverty and promoting prosperity in changing goals, and the goals to be reported. Indonesia analyzed the correlation between the 7 goals reported to the our national priorities, which is the impact to poverty reduction and welfare improvement. So by contextualize the report, we also being able to gain local entities to be more participative. And once more for the leave no one behind philosophy. So we interpret it as being inclusive in the planning, implementation, and follow-up and review process. So engage all stakeholders into the process without leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now turn the focus to our distinguished delegate from Singapore, Ms. Nair, who has prepared the question for Ms. Lee from the Republic of Korea. Ms. Nairi is the Assistant Director of Climate Change in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Singapore, and Ms. Lee, the Deputy Director of Sustainable Development in the Ministry of Environment of Republic of Korea.
Right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is my question to the Republic of Korea. Singapore and the ROK face many similar long-term sustainable development challenges, but we also share similar long-term goals. The ROK's 2016 VNR report stated, for instance, that by 2018, the estimated proportion of the population aged 65 and older will be 14%. Likewise, Singapore too faces an aging society, with the proportion of residents aged 65 and older at 13% in mid-2017. But we also have many similar aspirations in terms of reforming the public sector, promoting a future-looking creative economy, and achieving growth through innovation. Since your VNR in 2016, what is the process undertaken by the ROK government to follow up on addressing these challenges and achieving these long-term goals? And given the emphasis placed on working with non-governmental institutions in your VNR, how have civil society and other stakeholders contributed towards the follow-up process since 2016?
Thank you for your question. The new Korean administration that began in May 2017 stresses the importance of making the life changes that people can actually feel. Therefore, the Korean government is working to apply SDGs in policy across the board. About the aging society problem, the Presidential Committees on Aging Society and Populations Policy get into action to change the policy direction, which was focused on the government-led childbirth. Now, Korean government tried to make the nationwide nurturing environment to guarantee the family-oriented lifestyle. And the poverty of the senior is also a serious problem. To secure the seniors' income level, Korean government decided to increase the basic senior pension benefits. And we also established the Alzheimer's disease care system. The government will afford considerable medical fees caused by Alzheimer's disease. The next is about the public reform. The government put the public reform as the top priority among the tasks needed to reform. In this context, we revised the assessment process to measure the social value contributions, much importantly, and to expand the participation of civil societies. And we even tried to merge to abolish the organization, which is in critically deep debt. Next is about growth through innovation. Korean government sees these issues in context of SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. We focus on growth of small and medium-sized enterprises through innovation and consequently job making. The role of government is to establish an innovation ecosystem and give financial and institutional support. For example, Korean government has a plan to supply 20,000 smart factories to local SMEs. And we are also seeing impressive activities of non-government sectors. As for civic groups, the Korean SDGs network makes proposals to government on how to accomplish SDGs and conduct monitoring. As for public-private partnerships, the Local Sustainability Alliance of Korea lead the regional implementations based on the principle of cooperation of public and civil. Besides these specific efforts, Korean government is doing its best to align the national agenda with the 5 Ps, the 5 core principles of SDGs. For people and for one of the Korean national agenda, the the government led by its people. We are trying to have the value of our people coming first in any social issues. Recently, a final decision of a nuclear power plant was made by a group of people selected from all levels of our society. For prosperity, we recently increased the minimum wage for the decent living for all and common prosperity. For planet, we've decided to improve the 2030 National Greenhouse Gas Reduction Roadmap. For peace, as the only divided country in the world, Korea remains committed to inter-Korean reconciliation and the denuclearization. Finally, the last principle is partnership. In this year, we are planning to establish the Korean national SDGs called KSDGs to accelerate the implementation of SDG plans in our 2016 VNR. Based on the UN SDGs, we will customize our own set of goals and indicators. The key in development of KSDGs is partnership. According to the vision of SDGs, Leave No One Behind, we will build up a joint working group among private, public, academic parties. The positive partnerships will lead the KSDGs to improve our people's quality of life, actually. I look forward to our next VNR presenting you how SDGs will be reflecting our people's lives and 5 Ps of UN SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, delegates from Laos and Singapore have agreed not to give an additional statement because we're running out of time and they're helping us. I thank them very, very much. So I would like to thank them, ask them to go back to their seats while I'm asking the final group of countries, which is Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Thailand to join me. Thank you very much. And while the 4 countries are joining, I'm going to invite Mr. Toilu Kurbanov, Deputy Executive Coordinator of the UN Volunteers, to reflect very briefly and share experience in helping countries preparing their reviews. And I'm asking all of you to help us keeping the time because our translators will leave us in 20 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. This is Toilu Kurbanov. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to play the role of the background music while the next panel is taking its seat. But on a more serious note, of course, it's a great privilege to have an opportunity to share with you our experiences. I'll try to briefly respond to 3 questions. What have we done to support the countries on the SDGs and VNRs? Why have we done so? And what have we learned in the process? On the first question, ladies and gentlemen, as you would be aware, there are guidelines from the Secretary General that direct UN country teams to support member states upon their request in the VNR process. We had this morning heard positive experiences from Laos and from Kiribati. There are experiences from elsewhere in Asia, from Malaysia, where the UN country team had worked with the government on the SDG roadmap, and as well as beyond the Asia. The latest example is the work of the UN country team in Jordan, where UN country team and UNB had worked with the government to facilitate inputs from the national volunteer sector into the VNR. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me turn to the next question. Why have we done so? We have done so because we estimate, in particular in the case of the inputs of the volunteer sector, that around 1 billion people spend part-time on the volunteering activities. This translates into 129 million of full-time equivalent volunteers around the world, of which 29 million are in Asia-Pacific. And that is probably an underestimate because, as we know, in Asia-Pacific, volunteering is deeply ingrained in our societies and cultures, and a lot of the volunteering taking place at the informal level. That said, the contributions of volunteers to the VNR process are important because this is the voice of 100+ million people around the world. And secondly, because the volunteers are broadly representative of our societies. They're young and they're old. They are women and they're men. They're people with PhDs and people with less education. People from marginalized groups, including persons with disabilities. So we believe that was a strong rationale, and we are grateful to see that the member states had recognized strong rationale of the volunteering contributions to the VNR. The lessons, ladies and gentlemen, is that volunteers are contributing to the SDGs across the board. that it is recognized in both developing and developed countries alike, and that the volunteering sector often helps to depoliticize discussions around the SDGs process. Because volunteers don't speak to the agenda, but they speak to the real issues, and they bring the voice of the communities and great granularity into the discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So let's go directly in the last round of countries, and I would like first to ask our representative from Sri Lanka, Dr. Douglas Nanayakara, which is the Secretary of the Sustainable Development and Wildlife, who will be presenting VNR in 2018, to pose his question to Dr. Samsul Alam, Member, Senior Secretary of the General Economic Division and Planning Commission from Bangladesh, who presented VNR in 2017.
Thank you, Chairperson, Excellencies and distinguished delegates. My question to Bangladesh. The government of Sri Lanka is interested in learning more about Bangladesh experience in the whole of society approach in relation to localizing and implementing the 2030 agenda. In addition to set up the SDGs implementation and monitoring committee at the Prime Minister's office to facilitate an implementation of the SDGs action plan, what other actions have been taken to ensure a balanced and a meaningful participation from the stakeholders? Furthermore, how did the government of Bangladesh overcome any challenges encountered when implementing the whole of society approach? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very pertinent question. And about SDG implementation in Bangladesh, Bangladesh government, with the behest of our Honorable Prime Minister, formed implementation and monitoring committee comprising of 20 senior secretaries or secretaries involving with implementation of SDGs. And Planning Commission is the focal point for SDGs in Bangladesh. And we followed certainly not whole of government, we followed whole of society approach. That means involving government officials, NGOs, international NGOs, civil society representatives from all a spectrum of civil society. And development partners, media, we talked to civil service training institutes, and so on and so forth. So we made SDG implementation as a social movement in Bangladesh. Following whole society approach, first what we did, we assigned every ministry of the government with implementation of SDG targets according to their rules of business. So we distributed 169 targets to these ministries and to come up with action plan according to the targets. And each ministry has formulated an action plan for that ministry. And comprising all those action plans, Planning Ministry, Planning Commission, we actually brought out an action plan for SDGs in Bangladesh. First of all, we covered next 5 years for implementation as we follow 5-year planning tool in Bangladesh. And we integrated all these SDG targets into our national plan, particularly in the 7th 5-year plan, which is in vogue now. And we also will be covering all these remaining targets that need to be implemented in the 8th 5-year plan and the following 9th 5-year plan. With 3 5-year plans, we will implement SDGs in Bangladesh. And the important job we have completed, I think, we prepared SDG financing strategy for Bangladesh. How much additional amount would be needed to implement action plan? We actually brought out a book on that. And we devolved the sources, the innovative sources that we can generate additional funds for financing SDGs. And the challenges faced, if I say truly, we don't face any problem with participation of the people. The big problem we'll be facing actually generating additional funds for implementation of SDGs because it's a very comprehensive development plan. So we need additional funds. We estimated total additional fund would be required of amount $928 billion US. Yearly, we'd be needing $66 billion to implement SDG whole program. So I think that's, I tried to answer your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. To go to ultimate pair, I would like to ask Ms. Nguyen Thi Tan Ga, which is an official in the Ministry of Planning and Investment in Vietnam, who will be presenting VNR in 2018, to pose the question to Mr. Tukunpichit Bunsat, which is the Director of Development Affairs of Division of International Organizations in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Thailand.
Thank you, Chair. So, as we may know that the left known behind is the most important point of the 2030 agenda. So, my question for your delegation is that how you can get the effective involvement of all stakeholders in developing the Vienna reports in Thailand, and how you can show your voice of them in the reports, especially the most vulnerable group. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. And first, let me congratulate Vietnam and other ASEAN members who decided to present the VNR for this year. I think that's a very important step. To answer your question, I'd like to point out that for us, Thailand, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was assigned to be the coordinator, the lead agency for SDG 17, which is Partnership for the Goal. And we also were assigned to be the chair of the reporting on the implementation of Thailand's SDG. You know, my Director General is chair, so that means that we have to do the report, the VNR, for last year. What we see the VNR is that it is not just only the reporting exercise or just only to share knowledge and experiences. You know, it's kind of rather the process. You know, we look at it as a process to engage with stakeholders, to raise public awareness and to have contribution of everyone in society towards the achievement of the SDGs. So based on this concept, we try to engage our stakeholders. But, we have to admit, I think that this is in other countries as well, that the level of knowledge and awareness of different groups of stakeholders are not the same. Some they are very active, but some are not. So that means that we have to let them know that there is this process, and get them engaged. So what we did last year in preparation of our VNR is that we organized a meeting of the task force, to draft the VNR, which comprised of almost all agencies in the Thai government. As there are 17 SDGs, so the Thai government assigned each ministries to take care of each SDGs. So invite them all to come together, and we encourage them, to take stock of what they have done, and also to talk to the stakeholders in their field, just to know about the priorities, of the stakeholders. So that's the first step. And secondly, we also have organized kind of public forum, public consultation forum in the countryside. Actually, we did it 5 rounds. 3 times we did it in the north in Chiang Mai, in the south in Songkhla, and in Bangkok 3 times. So that means that we try to get the people on the ground, in each part of Thailand involved, and as I mentioned that this is a kind of public forum, that means that CSOs, the civil society, the academy, the youth, and other stakeholders are welcome to join it, to express their opinions. So we did it, and in Bangkok, especially, we did it with the university, Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, and we invite all the stakeholders to participate. And also at the ministry, especially, we invite the youth, because we think that youth is a major stakeholder as well. And also another session is dedicated to the civil societies. So all the stakeholders are engaged, are welcome to engage. So that means that we get their opinions and we collect it and we document it. We submit it to the government through the mechanism called the CSD, the Committee for Sustainable Development, which is chaired by the Prime Minister. So our task is to gather all the inputs, from our stakeholders, submit it to the government so that policymakers can have these inputs to decide policies that respond to the need of the stakeholders. So that's how we get the participation from the stakeholders. Apart from that, as I mentioned that this is a kind of process. When we finish with all the information and we draft the VNR, we present it in New York at the United Nations. We invite also the private sector and also the youth to come in our team, the Team Thailand, to be there and present their views as well. We have the Minister of Foreign Affairs presenting, the first speaker, and then secondly is the private sector. And the third one is the youth. So they have their chances to present their views, what they think is important, in their group. And lastly, after the presentation of Thailand's VNR, we come back to Thailand and we organize another meeting with the CSO, the civil society, and it is agreed that this VNR is useful. So we decided to do another VNR this year, but not presenting. We just want to have a kind of platform that we could talk with other stakeholders, and we decided lastly to set up a kind of open-ended working group between CSOs and the government as a platform, loose platform that CSOs and the government and other stakeholders could come together and discuss what is important. So I think that to have this active participation, I think that VNR report and the VNR process is very important. And hopefully, the ball is rolling now, and we hope to keep on this momentum in Thailand.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pichit. Mr. Nanayakara and Ms. Gah have kindly accepted to roll over their statement in the next session. I thank them very much, helping us with the time. And I want to help all the countries that they participated in this process. This is a new format we tried this year, and we hope to make it better the next year. So thank very much to all the countries. And now I would pass the microphone to the chair of the 5th APFSD, Honorable Dr. Rajiv Kumar, to chair the rest of the session.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, country representatives, major groups and other stakeholders are now invited to make short statements on agenda item number 3. Kindly focus your interventions for a maximum of 3 minutes on experiences and lessons learned in preparation of the voluntary national reviews. Would I have So I am told that because of us running late, the countries can make their statements in the next session, and therefore I now bring this session formally to a close. Thank you very much, everybody. Why do you need it? Why?
If I can have your attention, can you turn on the microphone? Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, for your information, we invite all participants to join our side events during the lunch break. Side events will run in parallel in 2 blocks, from 12 to 1:30 p.m. and from 1 to 2 p.m. Kindly see the program on our touchscreens for more information. We will also put up a slide with room information in this conference room during the break. And we also invite all participants to visit the Pavilion of Partnerships on the 1st and 2nd floor. On the first floor, you can explore the SDG help desk that you saw earlier and the energy portal, dive into a virtual reality experience, and also take pictures in our interactive selfie booth. If you have not done so, kindly do take a few minutes to speak to our volunteers and to visit the UNFCCC booth to offset your emissions. I hope you enjoy the sustainable food options in the cafeteria and in our garden. We will resume here in CR1 at 2 p.m. sharp. Thank you and enjoy your lunch.
उधर निकल गए सर। Yes.